Before we start, please subscribe to our channel. Now, get ready as we are about to begin. Story 1. I've always loved going to arcades, especially when I was younger. There was something about the flashing lights, the blaring music, and the constant hum of excitement that made me feel alive. So when I heard that Mr. Beast was opening a pop-up arcade in my town, I was beyond thrilled. I'd been following his channel for years, watching as he completed ridiculous challenges and gave away massive amounts of money to strangers. I couldn't wait to see what he had in store for his arcade. I arrived at the arcade early, eager to beat the crowds and get my hands on all the best games. As soon as I walked through the door, I was hit by a wall of sound and color. The place was packed, and every machine was lit up and blaring. I could barely hear myself think over the din. I wandered through the rows of machines, taking in the different games and challenges. There were classic arcade games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, as well as newer, high-tech machines with flashing lights and complicated controls. I spent hours playing, getting lost in the thrill of it all. But as the day wore on, I began to feel a strange energy in the air. It started as a slight tingle at the back of my neck, but soon grew into a full-blown feeling of unease. I couldn't put my finger on what was causing it, but it was almost like the machines themselves were alive, pulsing with some kind of malevolent energy. As the sun began to set, the crowd started to thin out. Most of the other players had gone home, leaving me alone in the arcade with the blinking machines. I wandered over to a pinball machine in the corner and started to play, trying to distract myself from the creeping sense of dread that was taking over. That's when I heard the first whisper. It was just a faint hiss, like the sound of someone breathing into a microphone. I paused the game and listened, but I didn't hear anything else. I figured it was just my imagination, or maybe the sound of the machines. But then the whispers started to grow louder. They were coming from all around me, and I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like a chorus of voices, all speaking at once in some kind of language I didn't understand. I felt a chill run down my spine as the whispers grew even louder. I tried to move, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the floor. I was trapped, surrounded by the voices. And then I saw her. A figure appeared in the corner of my eye, just a flicker of movement at first, and then a full-bodied apparition. She was dressed in black robes, with a long, pointed hat and a crooked broomstick. It was a witch, with eyes that glowed red in the dim light. I screamed and tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The witch cackled and flew towards me, her bony fingers reaching out to grab me. And then I woke up. It was all just a dream. But the feeling of unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something dark and sinister lurking beneath the surface of the arcade. I vowed never to come back, to avoid those blinking machines and the whispers that had haunted me. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me, waiting to pull me back into that terrifying nightmare. Story 2. Growing up, I was always a big fan of arcades. The flashing lights, the sounds of games, and the smell of popcorn and candy always made me feel like I was in a magical world. That's why I was thrilled to discover a new arcade that had just opened up in my town. The arcade was called Pixel Palace, and it was located in a rundown part of the city. Despite its sketchy location, the arcade was packed with all the latest games and attractions. The owner, a mysterious man named Mr. G, seemed to take great pride in keeping the arcade in top condition. At first, my friends and I spent hours at the arcade, playing games and having a blast. But then things started to get weird. We began to notice that there was a creature that seemed to be lurking around the arcade. At first, we thought it was just our imaginations, but then we started to see it more and more frequently. It was tall, dark, and covered in fur, with razor-sharp claws and glowing yellow eyes. It moved quickly and silently, always just out of sight. We tried to tell Mr. G about the creature, but he just laughed it off. He told us that we were just imagining things, and that the arcade was perfectly safe. But we knew what we had seen, and we started to become more and more afraid. One night, my friends and I were playing a game when we heard a strange noise coming from the back of the arcade. It was a low growling sound, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the lights in the arcade went out, and we were plunged into total darkness. We could hear the creature moving around us, its claws scraping against the floor. We huddled together, trying to stay quiet and hoping that the creature wouldn't find us. But then we heard Mr. G's voice. He was calling out to us, telling us to come to the back of the arcade. We were too scared to move, but he kept calling to us, promising that he would keep us safe. Finally, we mustered up the courage to move towards the back of the arcade. As we got closer, we could see Mr. G's outline in the darkness. He was holding a flashlight, and he beckoned us over. We rushed towards him, but as we got closer, we realized that something was wrong. Mr. G's eyes were glowing a strange red color, and his skin seemed to be covered in fur. We stopped in our tracks, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, Mr. G let out a loud roar, and the creature that had been stalking us burst into the room. We were trapped between the two creatures, and we knew that we had to get out of there fast. We ran towards the exit, dodging the creatures as they swiped at us with their claws. We burst out of the arcade and into the cool night air, panting and shaking with fear. We never went back to Pixel Palace again. The arcade was shut down soon after, and we never found out what happened to Mr. G or the creature that he had summoned. Even now, years later, I can still hear the growling of the creature in my dreams. I know that the arcade was a place of danger, a place where dark forces were at work. And I will never forget the terror that I felt when I realized that I was trapped in a world where even the games could turn against me. Story 3. Growing up, I was always drawn to the local arcade. The flashing lights, the sounds of the games, and the smell of popcorn always made me feel like I was in another world. But there was one arcade that stood out from the rest, and that was the Witch's Arcade. The Witch's Arcade was located in an old, run-down building on the edge of town. It was said that the arcade was owned by an old witch who had lived in the area for years. The locals whispered that she had supernatural powers and that the arcade was cursed. Despite the rumors, my friends and I were fascinated by the Witch's Arcade. We would sneak out at night and explore the dimly lit rooms, trying to avoid the watchful eye of the old witch. One night, I was walking home from a friend's house when I noticed that the Witch's Arcade was open. The neon lights in the window were flashing, and I could hear the sounds of the games coming from inside. I couldn't resist the temptation, so I slipped inside. The arcade was eerily quiet. There were no other players, and the only sound came from the arcade machines. I walked through the rows of games, my heart racing with excitement and fear. As I was playing one of the games, I felt a cold breeze wash over me. I turned around, and there was the old witch, standing at the entrance to the arcade. She was wearing a long, flowing robe, and her eyes were piercing and cold. I tried to run, but she cast a spell on me. I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The witch slowly made her way towards me, her long fingers reaching out to touch my forehead. Suddenly, the room went black, and I could hear the witch cackling with glee. I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the clutches of the witch. When I woke up, I was in a different part of the arcade. The games had changed, and the room was even darker than before. I could feel a sense of dread creeping over me, and I knew that I had to find a way out. As I moved through the arcade, I saw that the witch had left her mark on everything. The games had been cursed, and the prizes were now grotesque and twisted. The once fun environment was now a playground for dark magic and evil spells. I knew that I had to escape, but the witch was always one step ahead of me. Every time I thought I had found a way out, I would be transported to another room, deeper into the arcade. Finally, I found myself in the main hall of the arcade. There, standing in front of me, was the old witch. She cackled and laughed, her eyes glowing with malice. But then, I noticed a small glimmer of light coming from a door behind the witch. I knew that I had to take my chance and make a run for it. I gathered all my courage and made a dash for the door. The witch let out a scream and tried to stop me, but I was too fast. I burst through the door and into the night air, running as fast as I could. When I looked back, the witch's arcade was gone. The building had disappeared, as if it had never existed. But I knew that the witch was still out there, somewhere, waiting to catch me again. I never went back to the arcade after that night. But the memory of the witch and her cursed games still haunts me to this day. Please subscribe and pick another video from our channel to watch next.